Hello, all. Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Emily Jones from Our Home Tribe. We also have David Kate from Breakaway USA, and we have Simon Essler on as well to be part of the discussion. And I'm excited for this one. Emily, we met at AmFest briefly. I was able to dig in a little bit to what Our Home Tribe is, but I'm excited to have you go in deeper and explain to us exactly what's happening at Our Home Tribe. Do you want to maybe start by giving us your backstory, how you started homeschooling, how you started this company?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. I had a really great time at AmFest. I hope you all did too. There's such a freedom revolution going on right now. And that's really why I started Home Tribe. I actually started Home Tribe back in 2015 as a prototype. So this was way before homeschooling was even, I believe, like a main concept in everybody's mind. So I was raising my kids in Santa Cruz, and Santa Cruz is known for its progressive values. And so my kids were little, they were entering kindergarten and preschool, and I just wasn't finding any solutions that align with our values as a family. And so I started Home Tribe as a simple prototype to connect families and educators together for just simple learning experiences, because it was early learning. So we were doing just really fun experiences like in park settings, at the church. So it was very like Airbnb-esque. And my background is in user experience and interface design. So that's where, the prototyping came in. I had connected with a former director at Apple. We worked together on the concept for 8 months. And then ultimately, my husband and I decided to move to a more conservative area to try public education out. That was in 2018. And so when we put our children in the public education space, we just saw a myriad of issues like oversized classrooms, exasperated teachers. There was tons of bullying, and there was curriculum even in this conservative area as we moved up to Northern California that really didn't align with our values still. So I tried home education out for the very first time. My sister-in-law was like an OG homeschooler, and so she was kind of known as like the fringe minority, even in our conservative area. And so she really showed me the ropes. But it was really, really hard because we really didn't have a community, right? This was before pandemic hit, and there was not a lot of resources for like community building in even our conservative areas. So my husband and I, we went through a really hard time. We had like a tragedy hit in our family, and we put the kids back in public education for a second time. That's when the pandemic hit. So that's when everyone went crazy and they were running for the hills because our kids were on Zoom, as kindergartners and first graders for like 7 hours a day. And we were really just seeing this huge fallout in public education. And so that's when my light bulb went on. I relaunched Home Tribe because I saw the exodus of public educators as well as families who were really, really unhappy with what they saw during that kind of Zoom era that we were all in. I don't know if you guys I know you have kids. One of you has kids, but it was just
Simon does, yeah.
Simon has kids. Yeah. And so it was just a really, really hard time, but I believe that it was the silver lining to this revolution. So I relaunched Home Tribe. I reiterated it. We launched an app, and now our app connects families and educators together for local and online learning experiences, shippable and digital educational resources, and friends around the globe. We're an international platform.
Awesome. Yeah. During COVID, really, you're exactly right. I mean, people had no other options. They essentially were homeschooling. They all got a taste of homeschooling. And so you started around 2015. It really was, from what I understand, a fringe-ish movement, but also it was prevalent as well. Simon, you got started around when homeschooling?
Actually, from day one. My kids have never been in a public school. We, Amanda and I did quite a bit of research very early on, and decided from the get-go that we were going to do child-led learning. So our experience
with the pandemic, what time frame, what year around?
Well, my first son was born in 2015. Okay. And so once the pandemic hit, for us, it was a bit of a different experience, probably less turbulent because much less changed. They lost the ability to see some friends that they would have been seeing regularly. But our unschooling model just sort of continued because it was based on being a family together and proceeding through the days and, life learning. So them learning from how we run the household, what has to be done within the family, learning from watching us do our work and learning from watching Amanda and I juggle work and house kids and, focusing on the family itself, teaching them. So a lot of that stayed in place, which kind of reinforced our decision to be outside the system, because we noticed that as there was this kind of systemic collapse, the self-reliance that our family had created in terms of an educational model for our children was quite resilient as the lockdowns and all of that hit. So it was quite beneficial. And then also what ended up happening was, because of that exodus, we just saw a big boost in our homeschooling community. We saw the network of homeschoolers and unschoolers grow. We actually had some people find us because we were online dissenting against COVID, dissenting against masking. We actually had like local families see what we were up to and reach out to us. They had been experiencing the corruption in the schooling. They weren't just upset about COVID, but about the influence of, the gender ideology in the schools and all of that. And so it ended up creating a stronger network, while also sort of reinforcing all the research we had already done into the decision we had made to just keep our kids out of the public system from the beginning.
Yeah. So Emily, you said it was kind of a perfect storm that happened, so that you reignited Our Home Tribe. It really is very important. When I saw that what you were doing, I'm like, this is exactly what needs to happen. I haven't seen a marketplace for this, and because of the explosion in popularity of it, this is so necessary, because people that want to homeschool their kids, where to start? How do you, it's a big leap for a lot of people. And I feel like at first it's a mental thing to wrap your head around. And then from there, you have to have the resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw in the early days, there was so much terror and fear. Parents were experiencing so much fear because this is all we've ever known. I mean, I grew up in the public education system. I'm not sure about any of you, but even if you grew up in the private education system, it's still a system. And we are indoctrinated to a certain degree. And so us as parents, raising these kids, because homeschool is so foreign, I just saw, sheer terror when I was launching this. And so I launched Homeschool 101 Nights. So we actually had moved back to Santa Cruz for a short time, and we were doing Homeschool 101 Nights in our salon. We have a business there. And we just saw these poor parents like coming, and they were just in tears, and they were so sad because they were really actually shunned. School is a community, and so to be shunned from one community and not know where you fit in before you cross over into the homeschool community, it can be a really devastating effect on a family. We were hearing stories that these families weren't allowed to go to birthday parties anymore because of their stance on mask mandates or their stance on vaccine status. Back, I think it was 2021 was the height of this when we were launching our Homeschool 101 Nights. And so I felt really honored to get to sit with these families and just give them the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of homeschool. That's what we started. It was just California law, and that really put a lot of these families at ease. And then the second and third meetings would be more so, well, what's my child's learning style? So we would talk about the different learning styles. There's about 8 different learning styles. And then that would help them find their learning philosophies. So we did about 3 different segments, like the 1, 2, 3s, the law, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, the laws, the learning styles. I feel like that's really important because there are so many different types of learners out there. And then the philosophies that align, with those learning styles, which could be, Montessori, eclectic, unschooling, which I love unschooling. But there's about 9 different philosophies. And these are just age-old philosophies that are actually really coming to the forefront right now. Like we're seeing Charlotte Mason, Montessori, Amelia Reggio is coming back. So it really is a renaissance. And I think it's so beautiful to see the global community come together as well with Home Tribe, because there's this story that sticks out in my mind of this woman, and she was an educator in Dubai, and she actually exited her child from the space in Dubai because she was not liking the indoctrination that was actually going on in her country. And she's actually homeschooling her family legally along with her other families that were also—
Did you say illegally?
Illegally. Yeah, so she has created co-ops in Dubai illegally under the radar because of the indoctrination that's going on in their education system, which is very different. Indoctrination looks very different in every country. We didn't really get into that, but the general theme here is that there's indoctrination internationally that our families are trying to protect our kids from.
Absolutely.
I have a question for both of you guys, actually, Simon and Emily. So when it comes down to homeschooling, it takes a lot of the time from the parents to actually get it done. So for parents that don't want their kids to be indoctrinated, especially in these states that are very progressive, have these progressive values that they're shoving down kids' throats, essentially. Somebody that perhaps doesn't have the resources, what is their option with this? Is it not that time consuming as people want to make it out, or what is really their option here?
Well, I mean, I'll state the point of view of the Ontario government here, where I am, is that the homeschooling model is drastically more efficient than the public schooling model. So they consider 2 hours of homeschooling to be equivalent to 8 hours of public schooling. Because when you have that kind of one-on-one attention, and you're able to meet the child's specific needs, they don't need 8 hours of sitting at a desk studying something, So if that's the model that you're going for, there is a drastic leap forward in efficiency. And so for the parents who are wanting to mimic more of the schooling model, you are not needing to imitate a full school day by any means. Now, that's not the approach that we've taken, but that's still, I'll say, that is the point of view of the government here based on their own research into, what it means to start homeschooling a child versus having them in the public school. So for us, that was very inspiring initially. And then as we started to research more and more into unschooling, and, unschooling is really about not imitating the public system and getting to know the child so deeply that their learning path becomes more and more obvious as you get to know the child more deeply. Their intrinsic passions, right? So what they're intrinsically interested in, you surround them with what they're interested in. That we found out through research is even more exponentially efficient. That if you're following a child's passions, their learning grows massively. But that takes some deconditioning for the parents, because you have to let go of these traditional ways of thinking of a child's education. You have to let go of the idea of there being certain markers where a child needs to have learned something by a certain age. You start to find out that a lot of that is very sort of abstract. We really found that with reading. We noticed when we started to go down the unschooling path that we had relatives, grandparents who were very nervous about what we were doing, very upset that we were making such a drastic decision. My mom had been a public school teacher for like 40 years. So we were really moving away from that, and they were anxious. They were asking us, "Why aren't you teaching him to read? Why aren't you sitting down and like teaching him how to read?" And we had actually done lots of research that was showing that you don't need to force children to learn to read. In fact, they're quite capable of teaching themselves to read and of using culture and life experience to learn to do that. Now, I'll admit, I had to let go of some anxiety there. There were moments in the beginning of our unschooling model when I did get a little bit anxious. I kind of gave into the pressure from the grandparents and tried to be a little more forceful with it. My son rejected it so wholeheartedly, which, was actually correct at the time. We backed off, and it did prove itself. He 100% taught himself to read with almost zero input from us. Sometimes we were reading books to him, but the majority of the time he was just sitting with books on his own. He was entirely self-taught. And I'll say that to this day, I don't quite know what he was doing inside himself as he was looking at books for hours and hours, for days on end. He was going through a natural internal learning process that has resulted in him being able to read at the time and the age that was correct for him, for his innocence. All of that unfolded in a way that was correct for him. And, I like to look at the reading example because, when a child learns to read, that impacts their innocence, because it suddenly means that all the culture around them, all the advertisements throughout the city, on the buses, everything, suddenly they can read. And if you think back during COVID, there was propaganda saying that if you go out, you're going to kill your grandparents. There was scary, scary propaganda. At the time, my son just hadn't brought himself to that point of knowing how to read. And so I saw his innocence as being protected naturally according to the process that was correct for him. So, backing off and allowing children to lead themselves to a certain extent has proven to be very, very interesting. But again, there's a lot to let go of as a parent. And of course, I myself was in the public schooling system, so I've had to let go of a lot of the conditioning. And so I think sometimes the word unschooling is actually more a process for the parents than it is for the kids.
Right.
And you guys were talking about this term before we started the podcast, unschooling, which I've never heard until now. I've always heard of homeschooling, and I was this byproduct of the public system, but I was an athlete where I got to leave school a little bit earlier. So So I've heard of these terms and whatnot, but never heard of unschooling. So what does unschooling really mean?
Before you get into that, I'd like to hear actually, Emily, your experience with that, because you deal with people, not the unschooling, the economic or the time constraint aspect of homeschooling that parents are maybe anxious about or afraid of. What's your experience? Because you deal with the actual market side of it, the business side of it. What's your experience with parents and their ability to adapt to that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because, a lot of parents have to work that 9 to 5 job. So it's really just logistically speaking, how am I going to fit education in with my job? Is one parent going to stay home now? And that, it makes a huge impact on a family that's, normally used to 2 incomes. So that would come up a lot in our meetings, like how logistically are we going to do this? And I do think that ties into the idea, as Simon mentioned, that homeschooling doesn't need to take 7 hours. That's really just a filler. If you think about the schedule at school, there's all of these passing periods. There's all of this hustle and bustle time to get the kids actually on task and seated. And there's a lot of unnecessary time consuming activities that happen in public education. So really streamlining that and condensing that and helping parents understand that it can be streamlined and condensed, and it can also be molded into the schedule that you need it to be molded in, was really key to help the parents kind of get to the next step of their decision to home educate. Because, I grew up in the Bay Area, so it's a lot of rigidity. I mean, we work 5 days a week. We have really, really time-intensive jobs where we do have to drop our kids off at 7 a.m. and then we're not picking them up until 6 o'clock at night. So this is an extremely foreign concept for a parent who works in tech, or who works in corporate, or just has like the 9 to 5 job. So it was really just helping them understand that there is a streamlining process. And so I would just use the rubric, if your child is in preschool, it's just play, it's just unstructured play. And then I would even suffice to say that it's unstructured play until they get into the first grade. There's actually countries like Finland, I believe, that don't even put their children in public education until the 3rd grade. And so they're really, really focused on family time in that country. And so I like to bring that country up a lot and those kind of concepts up a lot, because they're actually far more advanced in a lot of these countries in even public education than we are, because they allow their children to play until a certain age. So then I just say, 1st grade would be like an hour. And they say, what if you get up until the 7th grade? Are they doing, 7-8 hours? I'm like, no, because you're condensing, you're getting to know your child's, learning style, you're streamlining, and then you're finding what works with your child. But again, I love the unschooling method because to Simon's point, you really get to see what your child is good at. You get to see what their real purpose is and their true passions are in this world, so that you can really hone in on that. And it doesn't have to be, the 9 subjects that were force-fed in public education. So yeah, I would say streamlining is key, and helping them understand that concept is key.
Okay, that actually ties in perfectly, Simon. Yeah, can you maybe explain unschooling compared to homeschooling a little bit?
The major difference is that you're not using imposed curricula and imposed structures to guide the child in their learning. There's a child-led learning concept that you're focusing on. And I think the first sort of conceptual stepping stone that helped me understand it was the difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is when you basically have an external operant that is trying to motivate the child. And so, the way that we're all most familiar with this is the grading system, where the child has, they're either going to get an A or they're going to get an F. And so you kind of have the threat of the F and the bribe of the A externally trying to motivate the child to move towards certain behaviors or certain materials. Whereas intrinsic motivation is what the child is naturally motivated to do, within themselves without any external manipulation. Once we really grasped this concept, that's when we started to grasp the unschooling model, because you're really focusing on what is the intrinsic motivation of my child and what is the effect of constant extrinsic manipulations on a child's intrinsic motivation. And what we found was that there's good evidence that the extrinsic motivation model, this is often called operant conditioning, it's a kind of behavioral science, that actually can damage a child's intrinsic sense of motivation and interests, because they're constantly being disassociated from it. They're constantly being given those breaths and those thrives to move along that track. So the unschooling model really looks at protecting the child's intrinsic motivations. And to understand that, you really do need to know them deeply, because it's something that's happening within them. And there is a kind of interplay between structure and more, open, like free play. You look at where they need structure according to who they are. And that really varies according to the child. Some children need a lot more openness in terms of, their day and what they're going to do. Whereas some children, they really do thrive on that structure. They really do need the day to be mapped out a little more rigidly. We've seen like the difference between our kids and how they respond to that, and we try to meet their needs accordingly. So the unschooling model, I would say, really focuses deeply on not at all trying to imitate the public schooling model, and allowing your child's intrinsic motivations to become clearer and clearer to you as you build their educational and life experience around them.
Interesting. Yeah. So school in general, actually, like we speak about this kind of flippantly, but it really beats the creativity out of kids. It makes them associate learning with something that is anxiety inducing, something that is not, and kids love to learn naturally. So that it just kind of makes sense what you're saying. It's just the fear from the parents, or the anxiety from the parents, thinking, well, they might not learn their math, they might not learn their science if they want to become an engineer or something. It's like, well, if they're not interested in that, they're not going to become that anyways. So why do they need to learn about, thermodynamics if they're going to go and do something else? But if they are interested in that, they naturally will pursue that, because kids, and if you keep that spirit of learning alive, which kids naturally have, ultimately you only learn anything yourself. A teacher can bring you to, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's the same idea. A teacher can't really teach anything to you. You need to learn it yourself. They just kind of present you the information. So that makes so much sense, but people, I guess, don't really know about it. I didn't know about it until you explained it to me in our last conversation. And there's other forms. Emily, you said there's about 8 different forms of learning, of homeschool approaches.
Yeah, so I call them different philosophies. So again, as I mentioned, there's these age-old philosophies coming up. Montessori, Maria Montessori coined Montessori, and Maria Montessori is actually really interesting because she had a PhD, she had her doctorate, and she actually worked with severely mentally ill children. And so she developed her concept based on her years working with these children with severe learning disabilities, and she actually would bring in children that didn't have learning disabilities in order to play, with these children. And she realized that they all could learn at the same pace in the same environment. And so that's when she started, building on that foundation. So Montessori is one main philosophy. There is Charlotte Mason. So Charlotte Mason is more Christian based, I guess, but it focuses on the classics. So there's a lot of reading, a lot of dictation and narration, she calls it. But it really focuses on those like classic novels. So I really do love Charlotte Mason. We do a lot of Charlotte Mason concept.
And that works for certain kids and not for others. Is that what you see?
I think that kids who love to read would love Charlotte Mason concept. But I love the Charlotte Mason concept because she does a lot of really open-end writing skills. So she doesn't focus on structure when it comes to like essay writing, right? That's what we're taught in public education. We have to have a structure. She focuses on like the thought of writing and just putting all of your thoughts down on paper and getting it all out. And then she focuses on structure years down the line. So I really love that about her concept. I focus on more of I do like a more eclectic model. Like we do some unschooling. We love to focus on the classics. I see a lot of parents kind of pick and choose from these different philosophies that they love to do. There's like traditional, let's see, unschooling is one.
It's interesting to know that there's all these different methods, and you can pick and choose what works for you.
Yeah, and some parents love structure. So there's those methods that focus on a lot of structure, and the methods, unschooling obviously is wonderful. And I see a lot of parents actually when they start their homeschooling journey, again, they go into the unschooling way because they're getting to know their child. Homeschool is just a relationship. I feel like homeschool is just like a word for like family time or like, being a stay-at-home parent or, like being involved with your kids. It's really interesting. I think we're really getting back to basics and the roots of what family is, and how it should be during the day.
So you said that you yourself have moved from the more structured approach towards unschooling in a sense. What was that like for you as a parent, like letting go of the idea of needing structure?
I really needed to let go, because when I started homeschool for the first time, I really failed. I feel because I was trying to have my kindergartner sit in a seat for 6 hours a day and do school at home. And I really truly believe that is the main reason why I quit, was because I couldn't feel like I could live up to the expectations of public education. And I think that's the biggest mistake we make as parents, because we never will live up to that expectation, because we shouldn't be living up to the expectation. It's a completely different atmosphere. We shouldn't be, putting our kids in this cookie cutter box. So I think just naturally it just didn't work. It didn't work for my family. We like to travel a lot. I'm an entrepreneur. So it's like, as entrepreneurs, we know like your day is just not the same one day as it is a different day. And so naturally, that's why unschooling works. Because my children are really passionate separately about what they love to do. I do have one structured child, so we have to provide structure for him because he loves that. He thrives in structure. But I have another child who is highly creative. He's highly social. That's how he learns. He learns around people. And so the unschooling model really works for him. I think that kids who love to dive deep into like certain subjects for a really long time work really well with unschooling, and that's demonized in the public education system. I feel, because we're segmented on, these 6-7 subjects a day, I think that we demonize the ability for our children to dive into one subject that they're highly passionate about and become proficient and become an expert in that subject. And that's really what we need, in this ever-changing space. We really need experts who are really passionate and focused on their expertise, moving forward in their profession. So unschooling for the win. I love unschooling. That's the future of education, really.
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. So would you say there's any negative effects associated with unschooling or homeschooling, especially with this notion that the child is confined to the values that I personally want them to have, right? But they never really encounter opposing values or opposing perspectives, especially, experiences I've had in high school, college, and stuff like that. Knowing my values has allowed me to, as I got older, to really, when I encountered these different opposing perspectives, to know how to respond to them and stuff like that. So is there really anything negative associated with unschooling or homeschooling regarding this matter?
Or as well, sorry to add to that, or as well, what are the criticisms of people that demonize it, if you will?
There's a lot of myths out there. We like to debunk a lot of myths on our channels.
Yeah, you have a lot of funny memes of that.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah, we do a lot of memes around the myths. Like, because it was so fringe minority, like, of course those myths exist because there wasn't a whole lot of people who did homeschooling at home. You were like the freak that lived on a farm that didn't go out of your house, that had, their parents had like 10 kids. Like that was just traditionally what homeschooling looked like. So the myth is like your kids are going to be antisocial. They're not going to be able to survive in the real world. That's a myth, because I think that children learn better when there's different age levels in their environment, especially when they're learning from adults, because they are, naturally going to be more mature. I think it's very awkward for children to learn with their peers all day, every day for 8 hours a day. I don't think that's healthy. And I think that we're seeing the fallout of that when it comes to like our culture and peer pressure and how these kids are growing up right now, especially with social media. So that's one myth. And then I think the second myth is like, you won't be able to go to college. So that really couldn't be further from the truth, because statistically, actually homeschoolers outperform their counterparts when they do get to college. A lot of people say you won't be able to get into an Ivy League college. That's not true. There's actually colleges who are seeking out homeschoolers because they outperform statistically. So that's another myth. And then as far as the criticisms go, like cons of home education, I think it really comes down to the parent. You have to be 100% invested in your children. And if you're not, I wouldn't advise you to homeschool, because you do have, we have to work and we have to have our careers, and we have to have our own passions, but you have to be dedicated to your child at the end of the day. And to train your child up in the way that you want him to go. And if parents are not committed to that, I have seen that it doesn't work. So whatever that looks like for you, you can change that and you can mold that the way that it looks like for you, but find what works for you so that A, you don't quit like I did, and B, you don't feel like like you're losing and that you're not dedicated at the end of the day. So whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and I'll speak to it as well. I think the notion of children being challenged by opposing value systems and ideas is important. I would say one of the ways that can be responded to with this model is the particular community that you surround the child with. We found that naturally, by following the relationships that our children want to have, rather than trying to find parents who totally agree with us as the leading edge of us forming community, that has created some interesting contrast in what's going on within the community itself. So, the homeschooling, unschooling community that we're a part of, it has people sort of across the spectrum of politically and ideologically. And so the kids naturally encounter families who live very differently. I talk about this often, but we still have, there are members of our homeschooling community who are still masking sometimes, which, obviously I deeply disagree with. But because there are relationships with the kids and they're going in and they have free play, for hours at a time, and they have a good relationship with each other, then my son is having to reconcile that with the fact that during COVID, I never masked. I was one of the people who just would not do that, and I cited an exemption. I went grocery shopping anyways, and caused a bit of chaos, but I sort of stood my ground. So he got to see that while he's also seeing other families continuing down this path, and he's asking questions about that. And we're really framing it in a relatively non-judgmental way. We're critical of it. He watched me through the pandemic make all sorts of like sketch comedy and all sorts of material satirizing what was going on. So his way of seeing it was sort of colored by our family values. And yet he goes out and he has relationships with kids who are running around in the gym masked, even to this day. So I think there's some opportunity for that. And then the other thing I'll say is that, even though this movement is growing, there's still a lot in our culture that challenges your family living this way. We've definitely found that. I mean, the contrast was stronger for us because we've been doing this from the beginning and we were kind of very, very fringe from the outset. So naturally, to an extent, the children are going to come up against a world that opposes their values. For example, our kids watching TV, there's so many references to like school life and like packing up your lunch and going to school and like episodes about the first day of school. And so my kids become very inquisitive about that. And they play games trying to imitate that. And you see them like they don't quite get it right because they've never had that in their lives. But I think like naturally they're surrounded by things that challenge what we're doing in the culture itself. And so it creates moments of discussion, of conversation, where you can help them cultivate free thought surrounding what we're doing and what other families are doing, so that their capacity to form relationships is primary. And I've done a ton of research into this. I did a series called Worlds Within on a platform called Rise TV, and I dedicated a whole season to the history of the public schooling model and the science of unschooling. And there's some really interesting research that's been done on this, basically showing that you have opportunities for child-led learning that maximize growth. And they looked at all sorts of different research in terms of what happens when children are alone in groups that are differently aged. It's like you were saying, all of them being the same age, being surrounded by the same exact age kids is not necessarily good.
It's not really natural, actually.
It's not. And so, there's research into what occurs when you mix it up that actually shows that sort of natural hierarchies form within the groups of children and that they help each other learn. There was a researcher named Sugata Mitra who performed these experiments where it was these children in India. Basically, they were children who there was no public schooling. And what he did was he set up computers in the streets that had internet access. And they looked like ATMs. And he would just observe groups of mixed age kids go up to these computers and just start learning. All these kids within like a week or two had taught themselves English. So they were able to search the internet in English and look for what they wanted in English. They were incredibly efficient. without any adult interference at the time. And so he started to look at, what does it mean to create these environments? So his research is really fascinating. And actually, I get into a lot of this in my series, and I have an upcoming masterclass that goes into some of the unschooling science, because I think it's like you were saying, Emily, that this is a big part of bringing things back to family. And because we live in a war, where there's an attack on the family, I think this is a proper response. And so, being able to focus on, the family values versus the ability to form relationships with those who think differently and have different values is really important. I'll say one more thing is that the other bit of research that I came across that was really relevant was how some of the Maori people out in New Zealand, the Maori tribes, they look at education, and they actually focus primarily on relationships, on the child's ability to build a relationship with themselves and others. They see that as a primary domain of intelligence. And so they look at solidifying that first, and all other domains of intelligence building upon that. So when I think of my children's ability to be out in a world where, frankly, we're going to see more and more division to an extent. I think that's part of what's going on. There's a lot of divisiveness going on. But does that mean that my child needs to struggle to form relationships with others who may be thinking and living differently? I don't think so. I think if they can be given that capacity, especially with unschooling. I would say it becomes a strength as long as you're able to focus on that and don't get too caught up in the sort of divisiveness of what's ongoing.
Yeah, the relationship thing actually is very well. So many things you guys said are interesting, and I want to touch on some of them. We're not going to have enough time to go through everything, because I feel like we can speak for hours about this, obviously, because it's such an important movement. Hopefully, Emily, we can have you back on and speak more about this whenever. You're always welcome. And so to start the relationship thing, thinking about myself, I really only learned to deal with people. Like, I was very book focused, and the parents, I come from an Italian background, and they're very much like, get your grades. I only felt comfortable relationship wise as I reached 12, 13, 14 years old. And that's something that's a little, I don't know if it's normal, abnormal, but there's no focus on that whatsoever. The other part with that is there's a lack of responsibility for parents in our society, or this lack of sense of responsibility for parents in our society to actually raise their children. They're like, public schools got it, government's got it, we don't need to even worry about it. And they're not present in their kids' lives. It's not even a thought in a lot of these parents' minds. And it's very weird how that's happened. And it's maybe 50 years where this has become kind of the norm, but there's so much that's how you get school shooters. Parents don't even know what the heck their kids are doing. What the kid is essentially having a psychotic break, has depression and all these other things, and the parents don't even know. It's pretty insane where we've gotten to. But so I'd like to actually look at the website, Emily. Maybe you can kind of run us through it, but I'm going to rattle off first some ideas that maybe we could speak about eventually, or that things that have come to my mind as we're talking. So the parallel economy is very important in the parallel society that I understand you work a lot, or I don't know if you're working with, or you've commented on Public Square. Maybe you can mention something about that, the parallel economy.
Yeah, definitely. Michael and I actually had a conversation, the CEO. In fact,
saw that.
We had a conversation this last week about, our take on defining the parallel economy, how they're building the parallel economy and how they are a values aligned marketplace that is, building that parallel economy, but also kind of deeper into the nuts and bolts and kind of infrastructure of, how we can build, further build a parallel economy. And so a lot of, Bitcoin talk came up. We talked about, decentralized networks, Web3, kind of what the future of parallel economy looks like. So the takeaway, was that there is, a values aligned parallel economy that is being built. We have to run parallel to the current society and what the current society believes, and how, they're building their foundation out, but also how can we further that mission and build infrastructure to support that parallel economy? Because at the end of the day, with the current infrastructures that are in place, ultimately it's trickling up to the top. We talked about, BlackRock and Vanguard and, how they basically own the entire world and how we can kind of decentralize ourselves from that. So it was an extremely interesting and complex and nuanced conversation that we had. I would encourage you guys to go back on that, if you didn't already watch the live, but a lot of topics were touched on. And I think we both went away with a lot of thought process, but not like a solution, right? Because this is such a complex thing and a time that we find ourselves in. So there's room for so many different ideas and solutions to the problem.
And we have to be aware of the war that is being waged. Simon, you're focusing on this 5th generation warfare, and they know that the kids are the target. If they want to shape the future, they have to go after kids, and they're doing a good job at it, tell you the truth. But it's so heartening and inspiring to see, people like yourselves. The whole impetus behind Breakaway USA is kind of to take this idea of breaking away from the establishment, the established system that exists, but that is rotting and has a rotting core that is just being, it's a house of cards that if you really kind of look at the foundation, there's nothing there supporting it. So creating this parallel economy, I find, is so important. Parallel economy, parallel society, because when this, crumbles inevitably, we need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to sustain our way of life and our separate values.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that really quickly to that, in the same way that they're targeting our children, they targeted us as children. Mm-hmm. And so what's cool about the homeschooling, unschooling model is that, we were talking about letting go of all the beliefs that the public schooling system gives us. A lot of that is you shedding the warfare, the social engineering that was inserted into you as a child. You're letting go of that. So if you want to understand the way they're targeting your children, you understand that you were targeted as a child. And part of this breakaway concept and moving into a parallel economy, it requires that shedding, that releasing of that social engineering so that we can move into that, that breakaway, that parallel, free of all that stuff.
David, I think you focused a bit on the parallel economy in some of your videos.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you're going to lead a movement that's going to essentially boycott these woke industries and institutions, honestly, then you're absolutely right. When you burn them down or they stop doing what they're doing and whatnot, you have to have some alternative to it. Otherwise, you're stuck. Honestly, you'll just keep doing the same thing. It's like a race. There you go.
Oh, rat race.
The rat race. There you go. And yeah, it's important to have a parallel economy for those means. So I really like what this kind of conservative movement is doing, like Public Square, for example, making sure that there's alternatives for things like Target, things like Nike, all of these different things, because if you're going to boycott them and burn them down, then you're going to have something else that you can utilize. So I think the parallel economy is very important. And I love what I'm seeing people doing right now because it gives them the option to kind of break away from these things. So very important.
Okay, so I'd like to actually look at your website, Emily, and maybe let me see if I can do this. 1 sec. How do we do this? Sorry about that, guys. Oh, cool. So there's also an app, right? A mobile app?
Yes, we have an app on Google Play and iTunes for your mobile phone.
Can you walk us through this a little bit? So what these are? So you have online classes, consulting, experiences, curriculum and materials, co-ops and pods, local educators, providers, and local friends.
Yeah, so we're an educational technology marketplace. So when you are looking for, online classes, you actually get to meet either one-on-one or in groups, with these educators or these people who are offering programs. So we have that vertical. We have experiences. Experiences are really great. You can opt into experiences, internationally. We had an Italian educator who opted into taking, around her hometown in Italy. So you can book and pay fully on this entire marketplace. So it's a full service marketplace. Mm-hmm. So experiences would be, you could do either group online experiences or in-person group experiences. For your group, you can find local educators. So if you click on, I think it's the local education button, there's actually a map. So if you type in like California, for example, you will see California educators pop up. I don't know where you are.
This is San Francisco.
Yeah. So if you type in California, you see all California educators. You type in the United States, you'll see United States educators. But again, it's international. So, as you're traveling, this is really fun for world travelers. We also have a component called Local Friends. So you can actually, as a parent, make a parent account, and you can make your accounts pertain to like what your indoor family interests are, your outdoor family interests are, and then you actually pop up on the map as well. So as you're traveling, you can find other home tribers around the world who are also looking for homeschoolers, either locally or internationally.
So it really creates the network, or the access to network with other people. And as this grows, it really will become something that you can find people everywhere, right? I mean, so this in this capacity, or in this stage, was launched when exactly, or roughly?
So this website was launched, the mobile web platform was launched mid 2021, and then we launched the app. So that was last November that we launched the app. So we are international, and we really believe that like education is everywhere. So that's really what we're kind of, the mission at Home Tribe is to help people understand that you can be educated on a family trip. You can be educated from a local in Italy who knows the area very well. So we're really trying to kind of break the boundaries of, how we've done education, and kind of get out of that system, but further, just expand the boundaries globally, so that we can have educators and programs pop up that are just doing education in a very eclectic and new and interesting way. So that's curriculum and materials. So you can actually purchase digital downloads. So these are a lot of digital creators who are creating, PDFs and printables for our homeschoolers at home. And then you just simply pay, and then that digital download gets downloaded right away to you. And then you can also get things shipped to your door. So if there are...
You can really curate your kids' education.
Yeah, so we want educators just to bring their own take to education. We do have values. So we have 6 core values that educators have to adhere to before they offer their program services and their curriculum materials. And so that's why we believe that we're a lot different from like Etsy or Teachers Pay Teachers, because with Etsy and Teachers Pay Teachers, we're seeing a lot of that kind of indoctrination coming through with the that they're actually providing. And then, at the foundation, as I mentioned, a lot of those companies, they partnered with VCs, and the VCs are going to ESG and DEI standards right now.
Right.
That's what we're staying away
They're infiltrating everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But, that was another point that Michael and I talked about. It's like, how do we protect, our companies as founders from these ESG and DEI standards that are, really the future of tech and the future of big corp right now. So
Emily, this is amazing. So I didn't really know the full aspect of what you were doing until literally right now. And I think that what you're doing is incredible, because it always seems like we're leading this movement, but there's nothing there to really connect the community and to create this community. And you're doing exactly that while upholding these values. So it's awesome to see, seriously.
thank
Yeah,
you.
it's really great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a really exciting time. This is a really amazing time that's breeding, I think, just exponential talent and exponential innovation. So I'm just really excited for the future, of every industry. I think that we're really breaking the mold of every industry.
Absolutely.
Work too.
Yeah. A point that you made there is there's educators everywhere. Everybody that has some kind of expertise can be a teacher in some capacity, right? And ultimately, as adults, as responsible adults, it's kind of lost on us, but it's our responsibility to kind of teach our things that we've learned to other people, but to kids, right? So it really creates it. Not only does it give access to people, to educators that exist already that want to educate, but it will foster that education spirit in people that never even thought of actually being teachers, or thought of making a curriculum or teaching kids. So it's great in so many aspects.
Yeah, I mean, Simon, you just mentioned that you were weren't you putting out a course, a master class, right?
Yeah.
Put it on here, put it on our Home Tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I actually have a lot that I could do, a lot on the
Mhm.
science of unschooling, a big ton of research. So yeah, we should connect over that actually.
Yeah, you can create courses for all ages. So if you have adult classes that you want to offer to other adults, like other parents, or even, college level classes, you have the capability to do that. But yeah, I feel everyone is an educator and anyone is a learner. So it's a really fun time right now. And I do feel like we're all entrepreneurs in one way or another. And I do think that's the future of work. So that's why I'm really excited that we're leading our children into kind of this entrepreneurial spirit, because I think that's what they're going to need for the future. I think there's so many industries that don't even exist yet that are going to be innovated with us teaching our children, kind of just to expand their minds. So it's a really great time. Cool.
Absolutely. So this, I mean, that is a good way to end it off. Maybe we should have started with that, but Emily, I'd love to have more talks with you. We can go deeper into particular things. Guys, this has been an awesome conversation. Anybody who's listened this far, who has been listening, we appreciate it. And we're going to have plenty more talks like this. So follow Emily. Emily, you are at Our Home Tribe. That's right on Instagram?
Yeah, those are social channels across the board. So like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and then hometribe.com is our platform. And you can download our native iOS and Android app on iTunes and Google Play. It's just Home Tribe.
Okay, so we'll put links to that and everything. And thank you for joining us, Emily. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This is a great conversation. Hope to.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks so much. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys.